Good afternoon. Everyone, on behalf of our director, Audrey Kurth-Cronin, welcome to our final installment of our Scientist and Strategist series for the spring semester. I'm Ralph Lopez, Deputy Director for Security Policy Studies at the Carnegie Mellon Institute for Strategy and Technology, or CMIST. And I have the privilege of moderating today's conversation. At CMIST, we focus on the smart development, use, and governance of emerging technologies that are reshaping the landscape of war and peace. This speaker series is an opportunity for scientists and engineers to come together with strategists and policymakers for in-person discussions that enrich our understanding of their groundbreaking work. Over the course of this series, we've examined topics ranging from nuclear deterrence to the role of technology firms in shaping geopolitics. Today, we are gathered for what promises to be a fascinating and timely discussion on unified cloud edge computing for defense and critical infrastructure. We live in a world where cloud computing is everywhere, but it's not always enough. Not sure why. There we go. When operating in adversarial environments, remote locations, or critical infrastructure settings, relying solely on centralized cloud services introduces latency, bandwidth limitations, security vulnerabilities, and data sovereignty concerns. That's where edge computing comes in. By bringing computing power closer to where it's needed, edge computing can enhance real-time decision-making, security, and resilience. And today we'll explore how this approach is shaping the future of defense and critical infrastructure. To help us unpack this complex and rapidly evolving field, we have two extraordinary experts with us today. First, Dr. Mahadev Satyanarayanan, known to many as Satya, is a pioneer in computing. He is the Jaime Carbonell University Professor of Computer Science here at CMU and has spent decades at the forefront of distributed systems, mobile computing, and the Internet of Things. His 2009 paper, The Case for VM-Based Cloudlets and Mobile Computing, helped define the field of edge computing. And this is why he is known largely as the father of edge computing. From his very first exposure to an IBM mainframe as an undergraduate electrical engineer major, which hooked him into the world of computer science, until now, his work continues to explore the edges and drive innovation. Joining him is Mr. Justin Fanelli, the Chief Technology Officer for the Department of the Navy and Technical Director for the Program Executive Office for Digital and Enterprise Services. Mr. Fanelli is a leader in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and IT infrastructure transformation. His work has modernized critical defense systems, generated multi-billion-dollar efficiencies, and strengthened the security of U.S. military and intelligence operations. Outside of government, he is also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University and frequently speaks at institutions such as Stanford, MIT, and Harvard, and CMU, on the future of emerging technology and defense. Justin is a native Pittsburgher, so we are thrilled to welcome him back home, even if only for a few days. Together, Satya and Justin bring a wealth of knowledge and hands-on experience to this discussion. Satya will present first. Following both of their comments, the three of us will engage in a lively Q&A. And finally, we'll take questions from the audience. So let's get to it. Please welcome Satya and Justin.
Does that work? Great. Thank you for that very gracious introduction, Ralph. And thank you, Audrey and Ralph and this whole department for inviting me, and Justin for making the time to join us today. I'm dying to hear all that you have to say. So cloud computing is something that all of you have heard about. And it's really big. It's huge. So according to Google, if you ask the question, how big is cloud computing, it gives you an answer that I show here. It was $500 billion in 2023 and is expected to grow to over $2 trillion by 2032. These are huge numbers, okay? Just for reference, the United States GDP in 2023 was 28 trillion. China was about half that. So the figures that are given over there means that 2 years ago, cloud computing was almost 2% of the total GDP of the United States. That's big. Now, if you ask a different source of data, you'll get slightly different answers. So this one says cloud computing was $561 billion in 2023. So, $1 billion here, $100 billion there. We're still talking about huge amounts of money. However, it's not only financially that cloud computing is big. The Nobel Prize in Chemistry last year was awarded to two groups of people who had made dramatic impact on various aspects of proteins. And half of the award to two researchers from Google was for a program called AlphaFold 2, which is this. Which is the button for, is that the front button? Which button is it?
Laser?
Yeah.
Yep.
Is the front button? Yeah. Called AlphaFold 2, which could predict the structure of a protein from just the amino acid sequence. It simply would not have been possible without cloud computing. So, no question whatsoever that cloud computing is big. So the question all of us obviously are dying to hear is, how does it do it? What is it about cloud computing that makes it so powerful? Like so many other very powerful ideas, at the core of cloud computing is only one simple idea, just one. And it's very simple, okay? It's the idea of consolidation. Packing together in an enormous data center virtually all the computing that you might need. Now, this doesn't sound like a big deal. How could it possibly produce all those great things that I shared with you in the previous slides? So it turns out that if you do this, people have learned over a 20-year period that it leads especially to tremendous economies of scale, in particular IT staff. And that leads to multiple benefits which are listed here, but which I'll unpack for you in the slides to follow. So I've mentioned data centers a couple of times. Here's one. This is just one example of now hundreds of data centers all over the world. These are huge rooms, and I'll tell you how big they are in another slide. But what you see are machines after machines after machines. The thing you don't see in here are people. Okay? So one of the huge benefits of cloud computing is the transformation of capital expenditure into operational expenditure. So maintaining machines for an enterprise like Carnegie Mellon University or any other enterprise is actually an expensive business. Syart Hall has computing services. There are talented, experienced professionals who work there. And the same group of people are in high demand at Microsoft, at Google, and lots of other places. So IT staff are very, very expensive. Air conditioning is expensive. Maintaining software is expensive. So to the extent that you can reduce the cost, this fixed cost, over very large numbers of machines, you reduce the marginal cost of ownership of any one of them. Especially for a small startup or a small enterprise, capital expenditure is very difficult. Especially because the accounting rules disfavor capital expenditure. You have to amortize it over a 5 or 10-year period, depending on the nature of the capital expense. What cloud computing does is it allows you to outsource these costs to somebody else. The business model is exactly like the difference between purchasing a home and renting it. Somebody else pays the many $100,000 to purchase the home. You just have to pay a monthly rental cost. And you agree to do it for some period of time, but that's it. You can walk away, and it's somebody else's headache how to pay the mortgage on that house. So this business model can, if you do it right, include tremendous profits. And Google and Microsoft, and especially Amazon, are living proof of the fact that the transformation of CapEx into OpEx can be very, very profitable. So that's one of the huge wins. It's a tremendous source of providing value both for companies like the big tech companies, which are the owners of these data centers, but also it offers benefits for startups who can't afford those CapExes. It allows them to get access to the kinds of machines you saw in that big room without having to buy it or maintain it themselves, and without hiring expensive, scarce, talented IT staff. So that's one advantage. A second advantage is that those big data centers are like small castles. They have superb perimeter security. And remember, one of the lessons we learned from the Snowden experience was that one of the biggest sources of vulnerability are humans who have privileged access to data. And so by restricting to a very tiny staff the number of such people, you reduce the attack surface for such attacks. Last but not least, inside the well-controlled environment in such a big data center, you can ensure superb network connectivity. Those machines can be connected together. Typically today in 2025, 10 gigabits per second is very common. 40 gigabits per second is also common. There are experimental versions going up to 1 terabit per second. Okay, so the connectivity between these is superb. And what that lets you do is to harness the compute power of hundreds or thousands of these machines in parallel, working together on a single problem. So AlphaFold 2, which won the Nobel Prize, was made possible because of this dimension. So, how big is a data center? So if you ask Google this question, it says it's roughly 1 million square feet. Okay? That's about the average size of a data center. Just for reference, that is about 17 football fields in area, under one roof, managed by probably 3 people per shift. Okay? So the largest data center in the world is in China and Mongolia, and it is about 10 times that size. So 1 million to 10 million square feet, somewhere between 17 to 170 football fields in size. This is the scale at which these things operate. So how many data centers are there in the world? It turns out that they're typically organized into something called regions, like US East, US West, US Asia, AWS Asia, AWS Europe, and so on. So regions of the world. And then within each region, there are typically between 3 to 5 data centers, typically so that if one of them is down, there are others inside the same region that can be harnessed to work. And so this is roughly the total number of data centers in the world. In the few hundreds is what we have today. So the net effect of all this is that if you took all the data centers in the world, you can connect them via very high quality fiber optic connectivity, and they form an inner core of extraordinarily high bandwidth, close to speed of light, limited latency, and very reliable network. You cannot imagine a more powerful distributed system than such a collection of machines, right? Amazing, really amazing. And then there's the rest of us. We unfortunately don't live inside that big room, fortunately, I think. We don't even live inside this inner core. We live elsewhere, in the outer periphery. We have Android or Apple or Windows devices, and we connect to this world either via wireless, like Verizon or T-Mobile 5G or 4G, or via broadband at home. Unfortunately, that network is not the same as the quality you can get inside here. And that leads, you will see in a slide or two, to the rest of the story. So what's the catch? I've spent 6 or 7, I don't know how many slides, 13 slides telling you the amazing wonders of cloud computing. Can we all go home? Unfortunately not. Wired connectivity is one-dimensional. The real world is three-dimensional. So somehow, if you're going to cover the real world with one-dimensional wires, which is what you need for connectivity, you have to do one of two things. You either have to somehow use a technology like wireless, which is not wired technology. It comes with a lot of challenges that hurt latency and bandwidth and reliability. Or, and this is what happens in practice, you have to use multiple hops of network connectivity to create a mesh. So it's very much like flying. If I have a few huge hubs, most places don't have direct flights to anywhere else. I have to fly to Chicago or to Atlanta or to Newark or somewhere, and then catch another flight from there to somewhere else. It's a multi-hop journey. Okay? And that is the price of consolidation. Whether it is airport hubs or data centers, the inherent limitation of consolidation is that covering the three-dimensional world now becomes a multi-hop connectivity problem. And what matters for performance is the number of hops. Each hop, as you know, comes with risks. When you get to the other end, you may be delayed and you may miss the connecting flight. You may get there and there can be other challenges. Obviously, network routing is very different from aircraft travel, but the underlying principle is the same, that every single hop is a potential source of queuing delay, latency, and vulnerability to congestion. So the net effect of all this can be seen in some experiments we did 1 year ago, April 2024. So we took a smartphone, just the same kind that you use, and we asked how many hops of networking does it take to get to Amazon East, which is located in Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C. So that smartphone is in my office, and this is in Virginia. When the packets leave the smartphone, they first go to a T-Mobile cell tower, which is somewhere in Oakland, and then from there, through T-Mobile's internal network into the internet, and then the internet conveys those packets to Amazon, right? This is the journey. So it turns out, if you measure it, it takes on average 12 hops to get there. Okay? So if you say, all right, let's not bother going to Virginia, let's just go to a server right here at CMU. You know, this machine is 10 feet away from that smartphone. They're next to each other. Okay? What small number do you think we will get if we were to use this network, where the smartphone talks to the cell tower, connects to the internet, comes back to the CMU server? It's worse. Why? How could it possibly be worse to get to a server at CMU than to go to Amazon East? Well, the answer is because T-Mobile, the closest internet connection to Pittsburgh is close to Philadelphia. Every packet I send from my smartphone goes to a place on the outskirts of Philadelphia, is inserted into the internet, comes all the way back across Pennsylvania, and finally lands at my server. And so that's how you get 15 hops. So if we decide, all right, T-Mobile is a disaster, we are going to create our own wireless network. So on top of the Hillman library is this antenna. It's a private wireless network. Nobody else uses it. It's only used for experimental research at CMU. We connect to the internet and go to Amazon East. That takes 11 hops, which is better than the first two going through T-Mobile. And if we say instead of going to Amazon, I'm able to go to the CMU server here, this is the one that has the fewest number of hops, 4 hops. So these are averages. If you were to look at hundreds or thousands of measurements over a 1-week period, this is the spread. You notice how the blue and the green, which are both private wireless networks, are very tight, and the T-Mobile is widespread. This is not because T-Mobile people are stupid. This is what Verizon does. This is what AT&T does. Fundamentally, to economically cover the face of the earth with connectivity requires multi-hop networks. And those hops add latency and all the hazards that I mentioned. So the question all of you are asking, I'm sure, is does latency really matter? I mean, we use Zoom every day. We watch movies. The world seems to be doing just fine at whatever latency we are able to get today. So why should we worry about what I just showed you? The answer lies in the fact that our goal is to advance the state of the art to new applications that can bring AI to the edge. And for those, these kinds of long-tailed latencies of a few hundred milliseconds are not acceptable. So let me give you an example. So if I have a smartphone and I'm in a hotel room in Manhattan, I can hold it up, look outside the window, and imagine an app. Such apps really exist. Imagine an app that takes a picture, sends it to a server or does the processing locally, and tells you this is the Empire State Building, this is the Chrysler Tower, and you move it and it shows you over here is Freedom Tower, right? So it's an example of a very simple augmented reality system. So in this system, here is a graph that shows you on the x-axis is how many 100 milliseconds it takes, and on the y-axis is how many of the results come back faster than that number. So the best possible would be at 0 to jump up to 100%. All the results come back instantaneously, okay? That's the ideal. No such system exists. This is what happens if you do all the work on the smartphone itself. So 80% of the results come back in less than 600 milliseconds. To get to 90%, you'd have to go to 800 milliseconds. So this is known as a long-tailed distribution, okay? That's because the smartphone cannot do a lot of compute. The compute in that huge data center is far more powerful than the little wimpy processing I can do on my smartphone. So suppose instead of doing it all locally, I transmitted the image to that data center, did the work there, and sent back the result. How long would it take? Well, if I used Amazon East in Virginia, this purple curve would look much better. 95% of the results now come back in less than 200 milliseconds. That's the best, closest Amazon data center. If I unfortunately picked Amazon West, which is in Oregon, it would shift to the right, much worse. If I used EU, which is in Dublin, Ireland, you'd now have to cross the Atlantic. And if you used Amazon Asia, which is in Singapore, things would look really bad. If I were to use the same wireless network, but use a cloudlet, a server in my lab, this is what you get. Okay? So this difference, that 95% of the results come back in under 50 milliseconds, is really the difference that edge computing can give you. And that was one example. Here we have many, many other results that we have published papers that are similar, that confirm this. And here's another example. This graph is different from the previous one. This is a visualization application in which I have earthquake simulation. And you are looking at how the building shakes when an impact happens. And you can make a perturbation, and the building's behavior is visible to you. It animates. So the number of frames per second, higher is better. And the best performance is if I have all the compute locally and have no network transmission. But if I add even 30 milliseconds of latency, you see that the frame rate drops to 10 frames per second. The movement is less smooth, it looks jerky, it's much less natural, right? So I could spend all afternoon giving you results after results of this kind. But the bottom line is latency does matter. So what's the solution? The solution is what we call edge computing, which is to recognize that consolidation, the idea of putting into one giant data center far away all of the compute you might ever need, has a natural limit which is determined by the results that I showed you. That the solution is to disaggregate, to bring the cloud closer. And so the small cloud close by is what we call a cloudlet. You use the same cloud computing technology, but instead of a monstrous data center, it's a much smaller data center. You can think of it, if you want, as a data center in a box. Okay? So here's a picture. At the extreme end here are the kind of wearable devices, your smartphones, the drones that might be in the air performing capture of video, and their processing is done. All of them transmit their data to a nearby cloudlet at very low latency, less than 20 milliseconds RTT, round trip time. So using the kind of connectivity I showed you with private wireless networks, you can actually achieve this today. And the compute that you do here is returned for very crisp rendering, very agile maneuvering of the drones. When a drone sees a target on the ground, it is able to recognize it immediately on the cloudlet at very low latency, and the software on the cloudlet is able to guide the drone to drop down to lower altitude and to track the target. That's the kind of end-to-end reactive system that becomes possible, and the quality of the software in the cloudlet does not have to be compromised because it can be heavier, can consume much more power than you could on a small compute node carried on board the drone. Same applies to all the other entities which are size, weight, and power optimized devices at this tier of computing. So the vision that we set for ourselves, which is not attained today, we are about 10 times further than the goal that I'm describing here today, is to have what is called a OODA loop, OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. This is AI in the tight loop of real-time data below 50 milliseconds. Today, that number is close to 500 milliseconds, okay? And our vision is to reduce it by 1 order of magnitude. Now, I've showed you the cloudlet is a black box. In practice, that compute node could be on board an aircraft, it could be on board a ship, it could be a large closet. It doesn't have to be a small box. It could be a small room. So the details are not important. The critical requirement is that the connectivity between the devices that are embedded in the world, real world, collecting data, and the processing that happens in real time, that coupling via wireless has to be extremely low latency and high bandwidth on the order of 20 milliseconds. So this is the edge computing vision that drives a lot of the work that is emerging in real-time AI today. So how big is the edge computing market? In 2023, according to this source, it was about $16 billion. And according to another source, it was slightly more. These are all numbers you should take with a grain of salt. How anybody can give you numbers to second decimal place, 15.96, not 97, not 9496, okay? Treat these with a grain of salt. But the bottom line is, compared to $600 billion for cloud computing, $16 billion is tiny. But these are early days, right? It is expected to grow to something on the order of 10 times that by about 2032. Okay? So what is driving this growth? Why are people spending $16 billion? It's nothing compared to 600 billion, but 16 billion is still a lot of money. Why is that? I gave you one answer: highly responsible services, where the latency of the interaction is very, very low. There's nothing else that'll give you this kind of capability, okay? But it's not the only thing. It turns out that even simpler requirements can actually force you to use edge computing. So if I have 10 video cameras covering, say, a small area for surveillance, each 4K video camera consumes 30 megabits per second of bandwidth. 10 of them is 300 megabits per second. If the whole city of Pittsburgh had lots of cameras deployed of this kind, the total ingress bandwidth from the city into the cloud would have been enormous. So scalability of high bandwidth sensors becomes very, very economically challenging. So pushing the compute close to the data rather than bringing all the data to where the compute is a much smarter approach. So scalability of IoT data analytics, Internet of Things data analytics, is a big driver. As you know, especially video, but also audio, comes with many privacy concerns. If I have a video camera pointing in my backyard and I'm going to ship the data to the cloud, I may want to strip the data of all privacy-sensitive information. One of the uses of cloudlets, and edge computing is to perform privacy-sensitive transformations of data before it is shared to the cloud. And so that is a third important use case for edge computing. As you well know, especially in adversarial settings, the enemy is always trying to disrupt what you're doing. And the easiest way to disrupt your work, if you're fully dependent on cloud computing, is to disrupt your connection to the cloud. So the more dependent you are on the cloud, the more vulnerable you are to disruption. So the ability to have transient, disconnected operation, where when you can't get to the cloud, a cloudlet is able to temporarily tide you over and seamlessly continue your mission, is a very valuable capability. And last but not least, it turns out that there are non-technical reasons. Europe, for example, has something called the GDP. In America, we have the HIPAA regulations for healthcare privacy. These place restrictions on where you can send your data. And if you want to process that data, it is much simpler to send the compute to where the data is rather than to bring it out. So even if economics and convenience would suggest use of cloud computing, data sovereignty may force you to use edge computing. So the net effect is that under different marketing names, nobody uses the word cloudlet, okay? Each wants to have their own brand names, but they've all embraced the cloudlet vision. So here is Google. Google calls its product Google Distributed Cloud. This is their web page. With Google Distributed Cloud, you can extend the latest in AI models and AI optimized infrastructure without compromising on data residency, what I just told you, latency, or connectivity. Okay? AWS has a product called Outposts. And what is Outposts? Here's what they say. Outposts support workloads and devices requiring low latency access to on-premises systems, local data processing, data residency, and application migration with local system dependencies. So it's the same set of 5 reasons in AWS speak, or Google speak, or Microsoft speak. All right? So how big is this? It's that $16 billion that I shared with you with projected growth. So assuming edge computing is going to become an important part of our world, there are important challenges that need to be addressed. And I'd like just to go over a few of those with you. Remember I told you, one of the huge wins from cloud computing is perimeter security. It's like a castle. Well, that black little cloudlet in the trunk of your car or in the plane or the ship is not in a castle. It's out there where it can be broken into, it can be damaged, etc. So physical security, and in fact in adversarial settings, including physical capture of the device, are real concerns. So techniques to detect this rapidly and clear any sensitive data with very low delay so that the capture is no longer resulting in compromise is actually an important research agenda. Administering hundreds or thousands of dispersed entities is much more painful. There is a reason why consolidation, economies of scale, is so attractive to big companies. Okay? But survivability comes with the headache of system administration. A big data center can continue spinning up servers on demand if there's a huge bursty workload. On a small cloudlet, you will get saturated very quickly. So a burst of demand may be difficult to sustain. So software-based approaches for multi-tenant scalability are another important area for research. And last but not least is the whole question of how to make money. The business model for cloud computing is simple. Everybody understands it. It's the difference between owning property and renting it. Right? This is a model that's been around for thousands of years, no difficulty in understanding. Edge computing is less clear. So companies, especially if you make edge computing transparent so that applications don't have to change, users don't have to change their behavior, what am I paying for if you charge me more for executing on a cloudlet? Right? It's a difficult proposition, but the business community is going to have to solve this to be able to advance this. So I would like to end with this slide, which is when we think about real-time AI, the standard we use to judge is ourselves, right? We don't use cloud computing. We don't use edge computing. We do all the processing in our head and in our body. We do speech, we do vision, we do thinking. AI is a poor approximation to the real I, which is us. Okay? how is it that we are able to do it, but we can't get these machines to do it? And the answer is, nature had 1 billion years to both evolve us, the hardware, and the applications, speech, vision, etc. We are trying to create superhuman systems in 10 years, 8 orders of magnitude faster than nature did. The only way to doing it, if we will succeed, is to be able to use compute resources that are larger, heavier, more power hungry than anything we could possibly carry with us. And by doing that, we are able to bring to bear compute at the point of use with very low latency in ways that are simply not possible today. Thank you.
Good evening. Wasn't that phenomenal? Let's do another round of applause for that. So a lot went into that, right? We see the CAGR, so we were actually talking beforehand, the amount spent on cloud computing now this year, by one of those approximations, will exceed the budget of the US Department of Defense. And so we've seen, we normally see this written in public-private, we've seen a shift in our lifetime and in our era that it's probably moving more towards private-public. Those words are actually reversing for how we think about this problem, right? We're at a university. Does anyone have a pithy or short explanation that they'd like to share for the theory of relativity? The one that I go back to is just that not all time is created equal, right? Some time is different than others. I would suggest that this time is not created equal to other times. I think we're in a special moment in terms of a tipping point for partnerships, in terms of the speed of technology diffusion, in terms of what wins and what loses, right? So it took about 18 years to get to that point in the cloud computing investment, right? This started, Satya can correct me, but this started one pre-Christmas planning for all intents and purposes from AWS, where they said, we need so much capacity that we can probably resell this, right? We've heard this story. And that turned into, well, first of all, the only profitable business within Amazon, but in general, the way that we compute worldwide in a very different way. And so we've noticed within Department of Defense, and then specifically with the Atlantic Council, that there is incredible innovation, right? Something that we've all noticed. And they made a statement that was that we helped with that is, I think, helpful in general, which is to say that innovation is awesome. And the United States is like incredible at innovation. Innovation adoption, we're probably not where we should be. And so if we're talking about conversion, if we're talking about the story of does the right technology get into the right hands, are we in the right place in this particular case from a national security and yield and economic prosperity story? Could we be better? I think the answer is yes. And so when they said we don't have an innovation problem, we have an innovation adoption problem, I think that in large part squarely falls on the organizations that are supposed to do innovation adoption or might even be competing with innovation adoption, right? And so within Department of Defense, the construct here is acquisition. It won't go any wonkier than this. Is the organization or the set of organizations within the Department of Defense that are supposed to do procurement and fielding of capabilities. And so we have a lot of those. We have 70 plus PEOs, Program Executive Offices. I'm the technical director for one of them, Digital Enterprise Services. And so our job to convert historically has looked something like a lot of government-created technologies, and has started to look more like commercial technologies. Both of those, fundamental, basic, and applied research at the university level by the best thinkers, best brains in the world and the country, is how that sort of like starts, right? That's that flow. But fundamentally, there is a valley of death. And at the bottom of this ocean, there are a lot of breakthroughs, a lot of great ideas, a lot of investments, a lot of things that probably should have made it to the other side of the mountain, right? Anyone have an experience with something that's in the red? Right. If we've been at this game long enough, and game is probably the nicest way to put it, then we've had something kind of like fall out, something that maybe shouldn't have fallen out. It's not always merit-based. In fact, in general, the transmission medium for great ideas, breakthroughs, and otherwise is actually relationships and people. But could we make this more merit-based, and could we tell a better data-driven story through data-driven decisions, so that the journey that Satya told us about, the journey of a bit, right? How many hops, how many stops, how many bus stops did the bit make it on the way to its destination? Well, the same goes for breakthrough technologies. And so as it relates to innovation diffusion or great ideas, how many of those great ideas make it over? And I think we've kind of consensus says not enough or not fast enough. And so that's the fundamental problem I want to talk about, and then maybe what we can do about that. Anyone have an estimate or personal experience for how long it takes for a breakthrough technology to come to fruition?
Around 18 months.
To what level of, so like this is 18 months, love it. For what scale are we going from 0 to 18 months? What's happening in that 18 months?
I feel like by the end of 18 months, you have a technology around like tech readiness level 6.
Okay.
5 to 6.
I would love that to be the case as a standard. I think as a standard, we're looking at longer than that. Army officer here, what's your experience been? 7 years? Yeah, you? Yeah. All right, 7 years. Also probably a little bit short per average, but yes, in general.
That's if we actually produce it. Like, there are lots of things we don't actually get.
Well, there are a lot of things that don't make it to the ocean, but the average is actually significantly longer than that. And so we have success stories, 10 years in the making, that are overnight successes, right? But what does this look like, and how can it be more repeatable? And so that was the question that we were asking ourselves. It's the question a lot of people have been asking themselves for a lot of time. So we're in the city of bridges. We want a bridge over the valley of death, not for everything. It's porous, but what does this look like so that we can think about it differently? And so we said, hey, we don't send warfighters into theater without kitting up. Ralph has had a kit at one point in his life, so have I. We send adopters into the Pentagon and into federal service with a kit. And so we give them the innovation adoption kit so that the best ideas should be able to make it across the bridge, across the valley of death. And so for this reason, we've broken it down, and we talked a little bit about where they need to go, but not necessarily how. And so all the transmission lines that make it in this digital world, I find a little bit of solace in analog machines. Simplicity is velocity. And so we said, hey, from if you can visualize it, then come with me. If we can make this a little bit more of a funnel, if we can make this trajectory or the journey of breakthrough technologies a little bit more chartered with normalized language, then perhaps there's less talking past each other and more just execution. So as we're evaluating, as we're scouting, as we're thinking about what's out there, what was down in the robotics lab today, what's happening all over the place, we are all scouting all of the time. Should everything make it across? No, of course not, right? But are we thinking about these and thresholds in a focused way? In the middle there, Horizon 2 is what are we piloting? What is emerging? What is coming to fruition? What's worth us sprinting for 18 months, right? And sleeping a little bit less than 8 or 6 or 4 hours a night during that actual sprint to get across the bridge. And then Horizon 1, which is scaled production. The reality of the situation is, where are we today for any given technology? We are living in Horizon 1, and the tyranny of the day says that we spend, unless you're in a research lab thinking about these hard problems, most people, most professionals spend 99.9% of their time in Horizon 1. The tyranny of the day wins, right? And so how do we turn off some of the either legacy processes, legacy tech debt? How do we turn off what no longer serves us, send that to Horizon 0, we call that cattle drive, and then allow Horizon 3 and 2 to disrupt and be pulled into Horizon 1. And so when we talk about edge computing, there are edge computing examples right now where we say, hey, this is a good idea, not just a good idea, this is far better than what we're doing in Horizon 1. Can we scale that across? Well, the way that the federal budget works is that if we were adding something in, we most likely have to take something out, right? That's a fixed budget. And so where do we have a Horizon 3 for Horizon 1 trade? What does that look like? That's actually the tricky part. And so what I would encourage people who are looking at these hard problems to do, whether it's commercially, from a research perspective, or federally, is figuring out specifically what gain you're creating against or what pain you're relieving against. Because if you have no basis of comparison, the boss coming with a slush fund of add-up money doesn't happen very often. When it doesn't come with a tail. And so all of the progress that was made on cloud largely was the bet of folks who were pretty financially backed to solve that CapEx problem, to turn it into an OpEx problem that solved that for everybody else, which unlocked a platform of killer apps. That piece is something that we would like to solve from a public-private perspective, but we need a coalition of the extremely willing. So who are those willing? Government partnerships includes the S&T community. Unit X is a book that I was listening to on the drive here this morning. There are other funds, and then and this includes, and so S&T, for instance, includes university partnerships. It includes DARPA, where I used to work. It includes ONR, who I work with, Office of Naval Research, that I work with on a regular basis. But then also vendor outreach, which has continued to grow. The number of companies working in national security is essentially at an all-time high and has potential to grow if we continue to do partnerships here and pull those across. And so anyone who is making big breakthroughs or has positively disruptive technology and they can prove it, we're doing lean portfolio management. That to say, we're making data-driven decisions, figuring out what to pilot, and then figuring out what to scale. Where we can scale, where we can divest to invest, we can go a lot faster. So this is as much a technology unlock as a money unlock problem. All right, so taking just a step back for a second, that was the general process. My PEO, I thought, was a useful payload for the what. And so the what is, I have 8 portfolios, about $2 billion a year, 138 offerings. We help a good number of people. And so this is the disc or wheel of different things that we offer or supply or deliver. A majority, probably all, is commercial off the shelf, but how does it make up? How does it connect? And where are our offerings taking something from Horizon 3 into Horizon 1? And potentially for this conversation, more importantly, where do we have Horizon 3 breakthroughs that we could pull into Horizon 1 a heck of a lot faster? And so when I meet with luminaries on edge computing or companies that are doing something in that space, or a company that wants to, commercialization as a medium to pull this through is very much, for me, focused on where can they make the difference. It gets particularly tricky when we talk about horizontal capabilities. If it doesn't fit conveniently into how we purchase or buy, then there is an impedance mismatch with some of those conversations, and that ends up adding friction and in turn time. And so I wanted to lay out with some actuals the capabilities that we're delivering. The way that this happened is they have sales teams and marketing teams that come to us, and then we deliver capability. We want to shorten that circuit. We don't need as many middlemen in this process. We want the capability to come across. And so what does that look like in the new world order that we're talking about, in that private public? Well, here's our basic architecture. We call this the birthday cake. From a function perspective, N-tier architecture is probably not too technical for a group like this, but we do want to start separating these out, because on that last wheel, what often happens is every component, every solution has its own stack. That's inherently inefficient, right? And so where we can be loosely coupled, where we can be modular or service-oriented architecture, as we used to say, 15 years ago, where we can line up components here, then we can be a lot more thoughtful and a lot more efficient for how we're actually connecting dots, expending, and then bringing collective breakthroughs through. What does that look like in practice? That looks like mapping this to operational threads. So a reusable architecture where if we need to do one type of operation or function, we can say, okay, let's coordinate aircraft modeling and simulation. Well, it turns out that we're going to use the same networks. We're going to use a integrated modeling environment tool. We can use our cloud computing solution, and we can go through our warfighting gateway. In this particular case, in identity management. In this particular case, historically, those would have all been components that we did individually for every stack. There was a time where we had 1,000 different identity management solutions instead of one enterprise service. And so as we do streamline these, and as more killer apps come online, and as we potentially approach the singularity that is possible with human-machine teaming, if the cloud is closer to us, then it's a little bit of an oscillation or a virtuous cycle where capabilities can come from this new orientation. So as you organize differently, you may have new ideas or new use cases. All right, so artificial intelligence. I mentioned that horizontals are a little bit more difficult to buy, and so we broke this down into a stack. And so I only wanted to show you this for a second because, again, hundreds of different AI projects, both in production, in Horizon 1 and Horizon 2, and then being evaluated. And so how can we think about this in a streamlined way so that we don't have sprinkled AI everywhere, but we have results? And so I just wanted to share kind of my mental model for this, which is, again, a tiered architecture so that we can make use of the different components. And so as it relates to, and this is an eye chart, so not expecting you to read it, but as it relates to hardware from cloud to edge, how do we make it so that folks can focus on the most important part or the differentiator? And so here we've said, where you have cloud computing, you use cloud computing. You don't have to specify. There's a special team for that. Where you're using edge computing, it's use case based, but we don't have thousands of different offerings for edge computing. You simplify that. And so where we can be almost as homogeneous as possible based on use cases, it actually simplifies. This point is probably obvious to all of us, but it came to a head for me when I was at DARPA, and we were looking at an operating system, and the point was made that there are more configurations in that operating system, and this is 10 years ago, than there were particles in the known universe, right? The math on combinations and permutations gets really thick and scary. And so we are working to simplify infrastructure and then everything else that goes on top of it so that we can be more end state and use case and payload focused. All right, and so those use cases, there are some where, based on what's available, there's a clear edge use case. There are some where it is an enterprise use case, and so or cloud. And so the idea of a concept of operations for what is available at the time, this actually shifts. And so the investment, if we're saying, hey, here are hundreds of billions of dollars in cloud, and then here's a measly 16 billion in edge compute. As that goes up, the possibilities actually go up for this concept of operations. So this to say, panning back just a little bit, if we expedite that funnel, if more killer apps make it through and more we follow the money and more money comes through, then more possibilities appear, and actually the balance of use cases likely shift in a pretty significant way. The interesting part there, other than all of it, because this is super interesting, is that we have an effect on this process. So how quickly, like how little you sleep, right? How quickly we can run from Horizon 3 to Horizon 1 will affect the use cases and what year these come to fruition. All right, and so how are we doing that? Where are we doing running? Are we just running? Is it kids soccer? Not exactly. And so to pull up this chart that we've shown before, and specifically in Horizon 2, we're saying, you know what? There end up being thousands of opportunities and options. That's actually a good problem, but we can only do a few of them, so we prioritize based on merit, and we run the highest or most promising use cases through. We do that through a process called structured piloting, and so structured piloting is based on a particular use case, and we run it through and we see, hey, is this ready for Horizon 1, or is it something that we should kill or terminate early? The valley of death actually, in my opinion, should be seeded by shots on goal that were early terminated so that we can leverage and put more energy and attention and money on the ones that are more promising. And so we've been doing a decent amount of terminating non-promising and then doubling down on larger investments. For specifically for edge compute, the cases that we're capturing now are more focused on highest impact. And that's something that we can tell from a calculation or paper perspective earlier. And so I just wanted to feature the ones that we're talking about the most, whether they're the most important right now, are some of the generative AI and LLMs, because that's where a lot of attention, a lot of investment, and potentially like a lot of latent breakthroughs are available. And so those edge use cases, again, just a fifth of the effort, but up because we pulled it up as a priority, is taking shape. And so enterprise chat was one example, and here's what this looks like. And then edge chat is another example where we're paying attention. The goal here is to have some of those pilots really, from a portfolio perspective, change the way that we work in a noticeable enough way that the portfolio is remaking itself on a regular basis. And so instead of 7 years, or maybe even instead of 18 months, this is a set of Lego blocks that is 1 or 2 or 3 is being brought in per quarter. And so what you can build with that bank of Legos is changing on a fairly regular basis. The way that that actually happens is by designating enterprise services, because the integration problem is pretty tricky if all of the parts are moving all of the time. And so we're saying in this particular case, when you have a service that is so good that people don't want to give it up, for the first time in my professional career, for the last 2 years, people have said, I now have services at work that are way better than at home. We should have been here, come back. We should have been hearing this for a long time. And we are in some cases, and we'll be doing more of that because we are taking more focused resourcing efforts, and we're doing more divesting to invest and reducing complexity, and that allows us to let the best of what we're doing sail and get the attention and really the protection that it needs to perform at a higher level. All of that from a technology perspective, I think, is again, important and interesting, but it's not impact. So technology is an enabler for impact. In itself, it's not impact. And so I'm going to kind of consolidate as I close. So as we name enterprise services, and as we provide new technology options or Lego blocks of combinations and permutations of capability to the folks who need it, the folks who have been using legacy tech, we focus those sprints and those execution activities to getting something out there, but something more interesting is happening. As we put it into the hands of users, they are figuring out what to do with it in a different way. And so by learning, by doing, by experimenting, by working with the technology, new possibilities are being built, right? Almost nothing actually works well at distance. And so when we give our users the technology to be creative, to do human-machine teaming, to solve an existing problem with new capabilities, they are coming out with better solutions, novel solutions. And as we let them play, it allows us to, from a concept of operations, reimagine how we actually execute. And so then we can come back to say, between the technology and the new concept of operations or application, or really human, the I in AI, as those team together, did it make a difference? And so what we're seeing is power laws impacts to our resiliency. We put in all of this effort, but did it move the needle? Yes, it did. It made us this much more resilient. Adaptability. We've seen in Ukraine that some of these cycles have gone from months to days, and in some cases, hours. Those are order of magnitude power law changes. Customer satisfaction is something that we didn't always worry about. And now we do, and you can see the difference. We've measured what matters in this particular case, in this particular human case. And then user time loss that we have measured in a unit that I care not to share in terms of the magnitude of it. But as that drastically drops down and we make these data-driven decisions, we can show that investment and yield and partnerships are drastically changing this portfolio of what we get and who uses them. And who does that benefit? Well, I'd say that there is an inextricable story, an intertwinement between economic prosperity and national security, and the better we are at this from a deterrence perspective. Oop, was that me? These are the folks who benefit. So certainly the American people and those who serve, and then overall from a peace through strength perspective, the better off we can all be. And so as we all work together, and thank you guys so much for being here, because to me that says, hey, these are intersection living people. We are folks who are thinking about technology, thinking about science, thinking about strategy, and thinking about execution. And so as we work to protect those in my office, for those who protect all of us on this land, we are trying to allow technology to be an enabler for that national security. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you, first of all, for a very stimulating discussion. And I'd like to start the Q&A period by really talking about the transformative potential of edge computing on society. So, it seems like low latency edge computing is going to affect a broad array of products and services. But can you help everyone visualize some specific examples of how it'll change the way we live our individual lives at home, how organizations will change the way that they operate, and maybe how we even think about how we might operate in military operations, on subs, on ships, in order to have some more tangible, concrete examples?
So let me give you a simple example. At least some people in this room are old enough to remember a time when we had to use printed paper maps. I remember those bad old days. Where are we on this map was question one. Which way do I hold it? Where are we trying to get to? And, you know, it was not easy. And today, we don't even think about this. You have a GPS navigation app. It tells you where to go. If you make a mistake, it catches it immediately and tells you. So that's an example of a technology that is in use every single day by billions of people. We don't even think about it, but it's possible because of the use of a very limited form of AI, the use of GPS sensors combined with deep knowledge about direction finding and routes and combining the two together. Now let's fast forward. There are many, many other situations where you could generalize these ideas. Imagine, you know, when you can't see very well, you wear glasses. When you can't hear very well, you get hearing aids. Well, when you start becoming forgetful or demonstrate early stages of memory loss, we have nothing. Imagine a few years from now, a pair of glasses I'm wearing tells me when I bump into Justin somewhere in America, some part of the country. He smiles at me, and I don't recall who he is. And it whispers in my ear before he catches on that I don't remember him. Oh, that's Justin. You gave a talk with him at CMU in April 2025. And it does it so fast that he doesn't even know that I was actually assisted. Right? That's a trivial example, right? Multiply that in countless ways. So the ability to inject intelligent actions that augment human capabilities in real time in a very context-specific and intelligent and graceful way is the kind of transformation that could be produced. And I will let Justin speculate on how, in a warfighter situation, you could extrapolate from these ideas.
Thoughts of what I would call pretty close to the singularity or on the trajectory towards the singularity are pretty exciting. And so there are places where we've been kind of nibbling at the edges. Who remembers the commercial flop that was Google Glass?
We use them.
Right. And so that was originally IP out of a DARPA program. And often what was old is new again. And so this is a case where augmentation would allow us, but there are some things that weren't right yet. And so what is the size of the compute? What is necessary? And then ultimately, what are the limiting factors that allow us to surge in this particular case? And so as we look at what's happening around the world right now, whether that's the Red Sea or Ukraine, there is still a lot of human-on-human fighting. And so the better or more performant or smaller or more energy efficient that some of the edge computing gets, the more that we could see metal on metal, the more that autonomy, the performance of drones, the performance of fully autonomous drones together in swarm, the more of that is not human in the loop, but on the loop, or the more of that is unmanned. I was at an event relatively recently where folks were talking about never again a manned fighting vessel. That is dependent on edge compute and advances that are made there. But between showing from a performance perspective that we have so much that it deters physical conflict to pulling humans out of the physical conflict or showing an overmatch somewhere in between and preserving life and preserving way of life, I think is in the realm of the possible and something that we should all be sprinting towards together.
So if in order to get to a future where the edge capabilities are deployed, mature, available, accessible at a reasonable cost, there's this kind of period of transformation, right? We have to, in essence, create conditions where we can turn the growth curve, the innovation curve, upward in order to create growth. But there's a lot of challenges to that. So in a regular home today, for example, there's very little need for low latency capabilities. Most instruments in a house are not edge native. And industry today, similarly, factories, the way we produce essential components are similarly not structured for that. So what do you think are the key challenges, the key things that we need to change, policies perhaps that we need to put in place in order to allow edge computing to flourish, in order to get it to accelerate? Either one of you can start.
I'll start. For me, this is a Horizon 2 problem. If more often than not, whether I'm at a commercial facility or a military facility, when someone pitches a breakthrough, they say, here's how much better I could make the capability. And I think that for a while there, we thought government was alone, but budgets being what they are, it's very hard for anyone to take the leap of faith and say, we're going to move fast on this. And so sector by sector, if more of those are connected to a divestment, then we get there faster. So I'll use specific examples. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars on 5G experimentation within Department of Defense. When that was done, or when we were executing the Horizon 2 activities, they were showing how much better it was, but there were no places where you could turn off what you were doing. And so they had to be side by side with existing capability. If we don't think about how this fits into a vertical stack, if we're commercialization and business cases are how these cases speed up. And so where we are thinking about technology without the economics, I think we just, we drag and drift. And so the answer to the question is where you can show outcomes overmatch from a data-driven perspective and a business case that would allow funders, companies, and anyone with a B in their budget and potentially just high M in their budget, you can get over the hump. I think as we're nibbling around the edges there, that is too slow and too individual sector dependent to for that to happen quickly. And so I think once that gets figured out, then we're unlocked.
So that's a very insightful way of thinking about it. Let me give you an answer that is closer to the way I think about it, which certainly doesn't have the defense context that Justin is able to give you. I think what we face is a chicken or egg problem. So look at this example that I just gave you of being reminded of who the person I'm seeing in my eyeglasses are. It's obviously the kind of apps you want people to create. But for those apps to flourish, I need the kind of low latency edge computing that exists. But the folks like T-Mobile, remember the results I showed you? If they are going to somehow provide cloudlets or have a business model in which somebody else provides the cloudlets, the first question they ask is, which are the applications that ask for this low latency? So each stands looking at the other and say, you go first. And so I think the single biggest accelerator, catalyst, will be things that accelerate the breaking of this deadlock. And I think this is where a major entity like the Department of Defense can have huge influence, because they can say, okay, we are behind this, and it gives confidence to the people who are going to be investing in infrastructure to say, okay, we'll make the investment. And then the other parties gain the confidence that the apps that they create will actually be deployable at scale. And so once you have that virtuous cycle bootstrapped, it takes off on its own. Bootstrapping is the hard part.
The nuance here is really important, right? So that visual mapped onto the valley of death or the chasm is a staring contest, right? So there is someone in Horizon 1 who wants an improvement, who is looking at the Horizon 3 capability saying, come over here. No, you come closer to me. And there's a chasm in between, right? And so these two groups, to Satya's point, to the professor's point, are like too far away. And so it's a dance, but it's a dance on two sides of the mountain. And so what can you do? Like, what does bridging look like? There are a couple design patterns. One is for a particular problem or a particular sector, someone leans in. It is easier for Horizon 3 to lean in, but they're generally not a risk-tolerant group. In cases where you have so much money that it's easier for the Horizon 3 folks to lean in, we have so much money. So like from an AI perspective, ML is transitioning faster than ever before because the foundation model companies have almost more money than God. And so they can just commercialize things really quickly because they know that there is a captive market, right? And so what does that dance look like for something that's less proven? Either a smaller, lower risk activity or a promise of divestment and then a trusted relationship that you can double down on. And so we can look at this as like holistically, like how could this be? But the reality of the situation is unless we institutionally look up to somebody else to make this change, Schrodinger's cat gets the mouse. And so if you can do the running for something, it's in that 18 months, if you can prove the use case, if you can be latched on in a three-legged race with an entrepreneur who can get it, commercialization is the most American way to get across that valley to this point. I think there might be some guarantees coming from 1 to 3, but I think that matching is probably the most popular at this point.
Very interesting.
So we're going to take the opportunity now to leverage our wonderful guests here this evening and allow some questions to come from the audience. Please wait for the microphone after I select you. Stand and please focus on the question in the interest of time. So please, if you have a question, we'll take it now. Right here.
If not, we'll ask questions of you.
So you said there aren't obvious home uses, but think about it for a second. The case for edge computing is you need low latency and you need high compute. High compute doesn't mean necessarily solving a 5,000 differential equations simultaneously. It can mean recognizing that someone's about to fall in an elder care situation where you need a fast intervention. A lot of the devices in the home right now require a human, like the Ring doorbell, needs someone on the other side looking at whatever it's showing you. The same thing with monitors for kids. How many gunshots accidents are there with young kids in houses? All of these things one could imagine having smart systems around the house that are monitoring, doing the compute, and then alerting the humans rather than having the humans constantly be vigilant. I just think there are many, many, many cases like this where home use is a great fertile place to be the driver for the economics of edge computing.
And I think to this point, this illustrates a case where that is a horizontal capability. And so my budget for at home for, accident monitoring is very low, right? But if we say we are going to allocate some of the hospital bill budget to prevention, then we have connected dots, right? And so that actual dot connecting, if it's on the consumer, it goes really slowly. And so when it's on the researcher or the commercializer, it goes faster, because if we're waiting for the general population to connect dots on these use cases, I just think we're lost at sea.
I mean, I agree completely with Bobby's excellent characterization of use cases, but I do think the challenge is the business models that'll lead to that. Those are where the challenges lie.
Please.
Okay, I'll stand up. First of all, thank you. That was a very informative talk. So One of the drawbacks of edge computing you mentioned is, the physical security aspect. It's not nearly as physically secure as, a data center. And I imagine that there are certain scenarios where physical security is much more important than others. For example, using edge computing in real-time identification in drones or in war scenarios and things like that. So in those sort of scenarios, can you speak to how to, improve the physical security of edge computing? And sort of related, I imagine the distance, like the distance of data centers, that provides some level of security that you might not have in scenarios where you need these smaller data processing units closer to the actual thing that is doing the processing, again, in war scenarios. So again, just the security of edge computing units in scenarios like that. Yeah.
Okay, it's a very good question. So let me start by answering, let me paraphrase for the audience. The question is basically that I mentioned physical security is obviously one of the challenges. And the question is, what kind of solutions can we imagine? Is that a fair characterization? So the first and important point here is 20 years ago, before cloud computing happened, there was actually a vibrant area of security research involving techniques to detect physical tampering and ways to cause secrets to be cleared before the perimeter of a box, for example, could be penetrated. So if it takes 100 milliseconds to penetrate the box, and you discover in 10 milliseconds that somebody is attempting it, I have 90 milliseconds to clear any secrets, right? So your penetration may destroy the object, but you haven't gained any advantage. Virtually all of this research vanished when cloud computing came to the fore. Because why do you need it? The data is secure in the cloud. So I actually think at least some of the approaches involve going back and revisiting ideas that were useful a long time ago, but whose relevance was no longer appropriate in the past 20 years. So that's one. The second thing I would point out is while it is true that the cloudlet itself is vulnerable, one of the things it does is that the devices that connect to it can now become more secure. So the reason is, think of a drone. If the drone is completely autonomous, carries all the compute it needs on board, well, if it's captured, all of the sensitive code and everything is on it. You have given that to the enemy. On the other hand, if you use edge computing in the way I've described it, cloudlets can be quite far from where the device they're controlling is. At 1 millisecond, right, light travels a long way. And so you could have a cloudlet 10 kilometers from the battlefront and still have excellent low latency, one hop. The important thing is not to have hops, right? It's very fast. So if you do that, you have actually improved the security of the tier 3 devices by eliminating as much sensitive data, compute from the device that is most likely to be captured. So a rethinking of security from first principles in this tiered architecture is actually what is needed.
I think building on that just a bit is we've seen historically, and the good professor can correct me, but we've gone from local to enterprise to local to enterprise, and we've gotten better every time, right? But we've seen this back and forth, this chartering. The interesting part there is, I think this is a case, his two good examples were not purely unique in the work had been done and then surrendered. At DARPA, there is, when do you bring on a new project? Is it the first time someone has a brand new idea, or did something fundamentally change with materials or the availability or of something, new research, maybe drew a connection? So all this to say, I think with as quickly as different disciplines are moving right now, the value of revisiting assumptions and watching limb facts as they change has probably increased. The utility of the revisit cycle is probably just heftier than it had been in the past, and I think it will continue to be the case. So there might be research that we abandoned 60 years ago that may have new applications, and as we archive more of that, I think we probably have to be creative in how we look at combinations.
Last question. Perfect.
Last question. Wow.
I'm Audrey Kurth-Cronin, Director of CMIST. So I'm very taken by your phrase, Justin, divest to invest. And I wondered also if it had an application to your work, Satya. So what my question is, can you think of a specific example, past or future, now that will help us understand the practical implications of divesting to invest a specific technology that's successfully done so, Justin? And Satya, is there anything potential, past or future, that resonates with you in terms of your work where it might be possible to speed things by divesting from something old and investing in something new?
I'll hold off on the answer until I hear Justin's.
I'm thinking of like a really practical one, so maybe I give two. And so one particular case is we had a VPN, and the VPN was compromised, and we had a Horizon 2 portfolio of other options. And when other users of the VPN, what they did, non-governmental, was they just said, we're not allowing VPN, and they had 5 or 10 blocks of cars into the office, and they had traffic jams, and they had people who were not connected. And we switched to in this particular case, a virtual desktop, streaming desktop type solution that went from 7,000 users to 100,000 users in a couple days. And so not needing to go back to that capability, we had a plan that was ready when the window of opportunity opened. Those are not, like, people wouldn't think about those as apples to apples solutions. And I can do something a little bit bolder than that. But that was one where we were able to do a in-day knife's edge cutover and then walk away from one investment in favor of a different shaped investment in the future.
So I have a much simpler example, not specific to the current times. I think it actually relates to the previous answer that Justin gave about the pendulum swinging back and forth between enterprise-specific and user-centric technology. So if you think back to the early roots of computing, there was a time when the only compute was the mainframe, right? And those were the really, really bad old days. Everyone remembers how horrible they were. And so when the personal computer was invented, we fragmented, we disinvested in the mainframe, okay? And we had personal computing. But very quickly, people, especially IBM in the early 1980s, remembered, oh no, during the 20 or so years that we used mainframes, a whole group of practices and additional functionality, such as fine-grained information control. I could share data with Ralph, who could read and write the data, but I could give Justin just read-only access. This kind of fine-grained protection and security and control flow had become possible because of the centralization. When we created personal computing and each one had their own box, this was no longer possible. And in fact, it was at Carnegie Mellon in the context of the Andrew Project that we developed the solution to preserve the virtues of personal computing while also retaining the control and administrative strengths of centralization. So that was an example where we disinvested in centralization, invested in decentralization, and we figured out how to bridge that gap. Fast forward to cloud computing, it's almost like the bad old days of mainframes. Because look at that data center. The only difference between that data center and a picture from 1960 is that in 1960, that was one monstrous mainframe. That picture had 10,000 or more mainframe capable of even more far more powerful computers. So other than scale, this swinging of the pendulum, if you want to think about it as investment and disinvestment, the challenge is twofold. How to do it intelligently, when is the right moment, and then the third and the most important is how to do it in a way that preserves the most recent advances that were made possible in the most recent incarnation that you were using until now. And that challenge is I think, the key. Because I often tell my students, some of whom are in this room, that legacy is turning, okay? That practices, once they're entrenched, are very, very difficult to disrupt. We still use a keyboard layout that first came into being in the 1800s, right? And you all know the story. Why haven't we ever changed it? And the answer is there's too much investments. We drive on the right side of the road, the Brits drive on the left side of the road. Nobody's going to change, right? These are examples, and one could go on and on of practices. I'm sure the military has an endless list of these examples. So the real challenge is, can you slide the novel technology underneath in a way that you can still drive on the side of the road that works for you, but in fact you're safer, right? And I think that is where the merging of technology seamlessly with the real world really finds its biggest challenge.
And so I think that was a beautiful example to end on, but I want everyone to leave as motivated as I am. And so I want to give you maybe throw down a gauntlet for a last example. So this is close to home for me, maybe you. So a lot of the organizations we've been working with have been hiring fewer computer scientists, right? There's a shift happening. I don't think CMU grads need to be concerned, but the idea of what one junior developer is capable of is changing based on human-machine teaming. And so, like, this is a case where Codium or vibe coding tool plus individual is going to look like a huge divestment in favor of so tool in favor of labor. And that's like the first example, because again, proximity wins, and it was tech on tech. When that, what does AGI look like in terms of like actual sector-wide disruption? Or this is probably one white collar domain and then another one. And so like, what does that look like? That's going to, I suspect, I project, look like a tool and the person and the tool teaming together in a way where potentially they get further faster, potentially the labor dynamic changes. And so I think that should be etched in all of our minds, and no one's coming to figure that out. It's on us to figure out what that formulation looks like and then what we do with the divestiture. If we double down and then drive that towards progress or reinvest that in edge computing and get smaller and smaller, then the pendulum can swing to a particularly fruitful place. But I can't think of a hall more appropriate than this one to be thinking about this problem and where to take it and how to shape that forward.
Very cool.
So on behalf of our director, Audrey Kurth-Cronin, and the entire CMIS team, I can't thank you enough for a wonderful discussion. Thank you. Another round of applause for our guests.